So let me ask you, I mean, you obviously impact people's lives. You interview a lot of people. You're around a lot of kids. What's your message to kids today? I know it can be challenging. You know, they're at home. They're not going to school. You know, they want to interact with each other, connect, communicate. But there's a lot of like bullying and negative things online too. Do you have a message for that?
I think the biggest message that I have for kids is whatever it is that you want to do, you can absolutely accomplish that thing. So like, don't be afraid to dream bigger. And I didn't have anybody in my life who was a broadcaster or a TV host showing me how to do this thing. I figured it all out on my own. But now we live in a world where these examples are in front of us all the time online. So you can find someone who is doing the thing that you want to do. And that just means that you are able to accomplish this thing too. I think to speak to the other point about bullying, I was bullied growing up. And I think that it's important to realize that very little of the stuff that happens to you when you're younger, like very little of that stuff like carries over into adulthood. Like very little of that stuff actually matters. Like you can carve your own path. It's not based on what someone said to you when you were in 4th grade or what someone said to you when you were in 6th grade. And I find that like the people who picked on me when I was younger, not doing very much with their lives now.
So I find a lot of the kids that bullied me or maybe bullied you were hurt inside. So I find that hurt people. And yeah, I look at this trend, right, of like if somebody's caught up in this victim mentality and they're just trying to feel good, a lot of people don't know that they have a choice to choose their feelings, to choose their beliefs of where their feelings come from. Did you have crazy experiences when you were a kid of you know, kids bullying and picking on you? Or did you see a lot of other kids?
I was bullied in a bad way when I was in 4th and 5th and 6th grade. And look, I was a kid with a big mouth. I was a kid with a really big mouth, and I was not afraid to say anything to anyone. And I was small, so I skipped a grade. I did 1st and 2nd grade in the first year. So I was constantly a year ahead in my grades, but also a year behind when it came to like my maturity and my size. So I was always one of the smallest kids in class. So I'm an easy target, especially when you're the smart, nerdy kid. But I also played sports. So I had a bit of an, you know, athletic edge to me. But yeah, I wasn't afraid to like speak my mind. And this was not good for the kids that were bigger than me and would just kind of show their dominance or show their aggression. So I had a few moments, in like 4th, 5th, 6th grade where the bigger kids would like pick on me or try to beat me up. And I would always stand up for myself. And I had this one moment in the middle of the classroom. I just kind of got pushed from behind when we were going to put our jackets on to go out for recess. And it was this bigger kid. And I just took him and like judo flipped him onto the ground. And all the kids were like, oh! And in this moment, I never got picked on ever again from that guy, because it was like, oh my God, let's not mess with Chris. Like he's willing to stand up for himself. But I know that like he had some issues at home. I know that like he came from a family where he was adopted. And I know that there were like some issues there. I think maybe with what was going on in his own like home life or his own personal life. And I don't know. I think that you know about this way more than I do, but it's almost like an assertion of power. Like you see when you're at home how the power shift happens. So you go, oh, well, I'm going to take that here. And if I assert my dominance on someone, well, now I become powerful.
Yeah, it's intrinsically really interesting to see the payoffs too that people get. You know, if they do it in one area, and it works and they feel good and they like it and they like the control or whatever else, then yeah, let's go do another area. And when you judo flip somebody, then people are like, yeah, that's not going to work for me. I think I did something like that, but a little bit different in a different way is I got into a fight, and at the end of the day, you know, I didn't enjoy beating people up per se,
Sure.
But I was sick and tired of, at that point, and I didn't understand myself, obviously, but I was sick and tired of, you know, people teasing me or whatever else was going on, that I was like, this is ridiculous. Like, leave me alone. So I think a lot of kids are feeling that way. Definitely, with boys and girls clubs and different programs that you and I have worked with, it's like, how do I get more of the interaction? Because they need it at this point.
It's funny how that happens when you're a kid, and it seems like almost a commonplace for like kids to like, kind of push each other's buttons, get in those like schoolyard fights. It's funny how when you grow up, the bullying changes, because schoolyard fights when you're an adult is called assault. So it's funny how that kind of like changes as you get a little bit older, and I don't know, it kind of morphs and turns into something else.
Yeah. So from your childhood to today, what are the skill sets that you learned to be able to help you? I think there's two sides of it. I'd love to know. One is the skill sets for you getting into the TV, radio, production world. And the other one is, and I think it ties in, is how do you build relationships? How do you connect with people? How do you, network? Because it's so powerful today.
I think to answer your first question, mirroring was a really big thing for me. And there weren't people that I knew directly who were going to be able to help me with my television career. I took a communication studies class in high school, which was awesome. Like, we basically made the news every day. Like, within our high school, we made a little newscast, but I didn't have anyone at like that high level that was showing me that this was possible or showing me the steps to take to do this. So reverse engineering was a big thing for me. Figuring out, okay, that person's doing the thing that I want to do. They're 14 steps ahead of me. So what is step 13, 12, 11, 10, and working all the way back? That was a really, really big thing for me. I read a ton of bios, figuring out, okay, what did this person do when they were 17? Like me. Okay, cool. So they volunteered at places. How can I volunteer at places? So reverse engineering and mirroring was a huge thing for me. And mirroring also, like, I loved the style of certain broadcasters. So I would take a little bit from here and a little bit from there, a little bit from here, mash that together. And then I had my own style. So that was really big for me. In terms of networking, I mean, it's vastly different now, especially we have Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and, Instagram. You now are just a DM away from somebody's, attention, which never was the case when I was coming up. I was in high school at the turn of the millennium. I was in high school in 2000, 2001, 2, 3, 4. You couldn't do that. You wrote a letter to someone and hoped that maybe they looked at it. Now you can send a DM to someone and, there's a chance they'll see it. Maybe they won't respond to it, but there's a chance they see it. So I say to people, always try to bring value. Obviously, you are asking for a ton of value from somebody who can provide something for you, whether it's their time or their service. What can you provide to them? And I think that if you can start to frame things in that way of like, here's the thing that I can do for you, famous person or successful person. Here's the thing I can do to help you. Maybe you can borrow 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes of their time and kind of build that relationship from there.
So value, I find a lot of people go and ask for what they want versus really understanding how to bring value. So could you explain that a little bit, like on one of the people you were going after that, maybe the guy that you partnered with for the fishing, the Woo line. What kind of value can a kid or somebody younger today, when they don't have a company, when they aren't a rock star talk show host like you, when they don't have hundreds of thousands of followers and influential people following their stuff?
Well, everybody has something to offer. I think that's the biggest thing, like right off the bat, everybody has something to offer. And maybe you don't have a specific skill set now, but what you do have is time. So maybe that person works with a certain charity. Maybe that person has an event coming up that you can volunteer for. Find out how you can wedge yourself into that door. Now, the door is like, it's a jar. It's barely open right now. See how you can find a way to jam your foot into that door and make sure that door doesn't close on you. So whatever you can do to get in that person's presence, maybe they're running a 5K race and you can go out and help, be a volunteer on that. Do something that you can get yourself within that person's circle. And they'll see that you're passionate about this, and they'll see that you have a drive, and that can start to build on itself. And I think one of the biggest problems that people have is they want things, boom, like immediately, and they want it now. And it's okay to plant a seed now for a little sprout that's going to grow in 3 months or 6 months or a year or 2 years from now. And I think that a lot of people will send out an email or a DM or a phone call and don't get a response, and they go, well, that person didn't respond to me. Why should I bother trying for anybody else? Knock on 100 doors until one finally opens. And I think that that's the biggest thing. And if those doors don't open, go build yourself another door and find another way to make this thing happen. It sounds so cliche, but where there's a will, there's a way. And so many people have that will until they hear like 3 no's and they go, well, yeah, it wasn't for me.
So I find that I've knocked on thousands of doors and people look at me and they're like, oh, but you have a picture of this person, or you're on Dr. Oz's show, or you're with the Dalai Lama, or you with like all these different things. But what they don't see is everybody that I knocked on their door that I didn't get an answer from.
Yeah.
I would say my success rate today is higher when I ask somebody a coffee or, ask them. A lot of what I do now, I think you do this too, is I invite them on my podcast. If I really think they're special humans, I bring them on and I say, hey, I can add value. Are there a few, who are like the top 2 or 3 people that, if you had like a wish right now and you wanted to meet them, or you wanted to have them on your podcast, or you wanted to whatever, who would those like 2 or 3 people be?
Well, I will say that someone who's had a great influence in my life, and someone who I've been very fortunate to share some time with, is Tyler Perry. And his story is so incredibly motivational. And you talk about like how no one talks about the doors that they knocked on that didn't open. Well, Tyler Perry's story is incredible in the fact that when he was 28, he was homeless and living in his car with nothing but a hope and a dream that this play that he had written would somehow be a success one day. A few years later, his play was a success with more than $100 million in tickets sold. He met someone named Oprah Winfrey. Maybe you've heard of her, and his life completely changed. And now he owns, one of the biggest movie studios in the world. So I had a moment with him. I've interviewed him a handful of times, and I had a moment with him where after interviewing him, he goes, you're better than local news. And I'm like, oh, that's very kind of you to say, but I really enjoy my job. It's great. He goes, no, like you need to dream bigger. I'm like, thank you. That's very kind of you. But like, things are going pretty well for me. Like, thank you. I'm on TV every day. I enjoy my job. And that sat with me. And it took me a few years, and I was kind of finally like, he's right. Like my job's great, but I want to do more, and I want to aspire to more. So I didn't exactly answer your question there. Like that's someone who's just, who's helped me out so much by leading by example. So to get to your question now, someone who I do want to spend some time with is someone you worked for. I want to have a conversation with Vince McMahon as a businessman. Not Vince McMahon, the wrestling promoter, but Vince McMahon, like the human, because I'm fascinated by people who accomplish things at a high level. I want to know what the first hour of Vince McMahon's day looks like. I want to know like what Vince McMahon eats and like how he's able to accomplish all the things that he accomplishes. Because think about it. You and I wouldn't even be having this conversation right now if Vince McMahon hadn't created the world that Vince McMahon created. So I'm fascinated by people like him who had this idea in their mind and then started to put the wheels in motion to create this thing and make it a reality.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, a guy who built a multi-billion-dollar company, right? Pretty interesting. What would what would be like your number one question? If he was like, you have one question and 3 minutes.
If I only had one question, I'd say, thanks, Vince. That's very nice, but I can't do it. Like one question. I'd probably say, why Katie Vick? Vince, what was the deal with that Katie Vick story? No, I would, I think I would say something along the lines of like, and I don't know how I'd phrase the question, but something along the lines of like, how did you build this? Like, what are the first steps that someone can take that has a dream of doing what you're doing? What can they do? Because I think that a lot of people just look at Vince